Estoy en Singapur, a punto de subir al escenario en unos minutos. Hace más de un año que no doy una conferencia. Estuve involucrado en un pequeño accidente y me tomé unas vacaciones. Existe cierta sensación de urgencia actualmente. El patrón dólar se instauró debido a una serie de sucesos accidentales muy afortunados para los Estados Unidos, porque nos dio ventaja sobre el resto del mundo. Pero nuestros políticos durante los últimos 10 años han abusado de este privilegio como si fuera un derecho de nacimiento, y ahora el resto del mundo está dando la espalda al patrón dólar. Esto provocará una calamidad de unas dimensiones que no hemos visto hasta ahora, y será devastador para la mayoría de la gente. No quiero que esto pase, pero el daño ya está hecho, así que me he lanzado a la calle para alertar a la gente y enseñarles cómo protegerse y cambiar el escenario para que sea una gran oportunidad. Siempre hay un resultado para lo que se está haciendo actualmente, que es aumentar la base monetaria en todo el planeta. Solo un resultado: precios más altos para el oro y la plata. Amo a los Estados Unidos, al menos el Estados Unidos que crearon los padres fundadores. Y espero que la gente se interese por esto, para que vean que lo que hizo grande a Estados Unidos es la respuesta a nuestros problemas. Volver a mercados libres, ciudadanos libres y dinero respaldado. Nuestra propia historia demuestra que este es el camino a la prosperidad.
Estamos entrando en un periodo de crisis financiera que será la más grande conocida hasta ahora. La transferencia de riqueza que tendrá lugar en esta década es la mayor transferencia de riqueza de la historia. La riqueza no se destruye, es simplemente transferida, y eso significa que en el lado opuesto de cada crisis hay una oportunidad. Las buenas noticias es que todo lo que necesitas hacer para transformar esta crisis en tu oportunidad es educarte. Creo que la mejor inversión que puedes hacer en tu vida es tu propia educación. Educarse en la historia del dinero, educarse en las finanzas, educarse en cómo funciona la economía global, educarse en cómo todos estos, los banqueros centrales, la bolsa, cómo te pueden engañar, cómo pueden timarte. Si aprendes lo que está pasando y cómo funciona el mundo financiero, te puedes posicionar en el extremo correcto de esta transferencia de riqueza. Winston Churchill dijo una vez que cuanto más hacia atrás mires en el tiempo, más verás el futuro. Este programa consiste en crearte tu propia bola de cristal, ser capaz de asomarse al futuro, ser capaz de cambiar esta crisis, la mayor de la historia de la humanidad, en tu gran oportunidad.
I was born in Salem, Oregon in 1956, and we moved to California when I was 4 years old in 1960.
Nací en Salem, Oregón, en 1956 y nos mudamos a California cuando tenía 4 años, en 1960. Cuando empecé a ir al colegio, a partir de cuarto de GB, era obvio que había algo diferente en mí. En quinto me metieron en un grupo de necesidades especiales. Resultó que era disléxico y los profesores no sabían reconocer eso entonces. Siempre era el retrasado de la clase. Cuando había algún profesor que conferenciaba, en vez de hacernos leer el libro directamente, me convertí en un alumno excelente. Pasaba de ser el peor de la clase a destacar en todos los trimestres. Pero el resultado fue que, tras un tiempo, ya estaba en todas las clases de refuerzo y no lo podía aguantar. Lo dejé con 15 años y nunca he vuelto. Siempre digo que en cada crisis hay una oportunidad y en este caso el déficit de la dislexia ha sido también una bendición. Como no podía leer ni tomar notas, he tenido que recordar todo. Y tengo la habilidad de... Digamos que mi cerebro tiene los circuitos un poco diferentes y tengo la habilidad de mirar un gráfico y ser capaz de relacionarlo con un gráfico que vi hace 10 años. Pero fue alrededor más o menos del año 2000, cuando Steve Jobs de Apple sacó el OS X y todo el mundo de los libros se me abrió. En el mismo sistema operativo había un programa de texto a voz. Ahora es como tener un asistente. escaneo los libros y los convierto a texto, me los envío por correo electrónico y lo único que tengo que hacer es resaltar el texto y el ordenador me lo leerá. La dislexia ya no era un problema, pero también me ha ayudado, por alguna razón, a explicar cosas complicadas a la gente de una manera sencilla. Así que he convertido en mi misión el despertar a la clase media y enseñarles cómo funciona el sistema monetario. Hacerles saber que hay una desastrosa calamidad acechando en algún punto del camino y lo más seguro es que sea en esta década. El dólar americano representa el 60% del valor de todas las divisas mundiales y más de la mitad residen en países fuera de Estados Unidos. La razón para que los países tengan dólares es, primero, que el dólar es lo que los bancos centrales usan como divisa reserva y segundo, que el petróleo se negocia en dólares. Así que esto es el mundo y lo que se puede ver aquí son los países que están evitando el dólar para comerciar. Están firmando acuerdos bilaterales en los que ambos países tienen monedas de cada uno y funcionando así, o bien organizándose, en fin, ya que se habla del grupo de los BRICS, Brasil, Rusia, India, China y Sudáfrica, que van a tener un banco que case sus operaciones comerciales sin necesidad de usar el dólar. Estos otros países intentaron dejar de usar el dólar, como Irán, y les prohibimos el uso del SWIFT. ¿Cuántos han hecho aquí cable transferencias? Así que sabéis lo que es un número SWIFT, ¿no? Es un código que hay que insertar y este número SWIFT es el que transfiere esos dólares de una cuenta a otra. Cuando Irán decidió que iba a vender petróleo solo en euros, entonces se le prohibió el uso del SWIFT. Pero hay países que ya tienen un recambio para el SWIFT y sin usar el dólar. Es el sistema Sucre. Irak empezó a vender petróleo por euros. Libia hablaba de crear el dinar de oro y usarlo para vender petróleo por oro. Así que esos son países que quisieron dejar de usar el dólar. También tenemos al oro compitiendo con divisa. Hay muchos rumores ahora mismo sobre el dinar de oro. Hay gente usando el oro en estos países y también en Utah. En Utah han reconocido el oro y la plata como dinero de nuevo. El oro es moneda de curso legal en el estado de Utah en los Estados Unidos. También hay acumulación de oro físico. Os mostraré luego que China está acumulando una gran cantidad de oro. Todos los países con flecha apuntando arriba están acumulando oro. Además, tenemos repatriación de oro. Alemania ha pedido que le devuelvan su oro y lo están consiguiendo. Venezuela repatrió su oro desde el Banco de Inglaterra. Y si ponemos esto en una línea de tiempo, vemos que los clavos en el ataúd del patrón dólar se están acelerando y se ve que no queda mucho tiempo. Estas son las pruebas de lo que creo que es el anuncio de la muerte del dólar. Una muerte cercana. Nixon acaba con Bretton Woods y entramos en la era del patrón dólar. El primer clavo es que Irak vende petróleo en euros. La crisis de 2008 y la impresión de 1,5 billones de aumento de la base monetaria viene después. A medida que se aumenta la base, la gente se preocupa por la inflación y es entonces cuando comienzan a buscar oro y plata. Irán termina con la venta de petróleo en dólares. Aceptan materias primas por su petróleo. De hecho, en Turquía lo que hacen es aceptan la moneda local y compran oro con esa moneda, para que básicamente estén cambiando petróleo por oro. Están haciendo lo mismo con India. Luego viene la segunda fase de la relajación cuantitativa, que es más impresión de moneda estadounidense. Libia, China y Rusia evitan el dólar. Tienen un tratado bilateral por el que guardan reservas de sus divisas nacionales y hacen intercambio directo, sin cable transferencia en dólares. El presidente chino, de hecho, dijo recientemente que el dólar como divisa reserva era una cosa del pasado. Utah reconoce el oro y la plata como dinero. China e Irán evitan el dólar con acuerdos bilaterales. Venezuela repatria su oro. China e Irán comercian directamente. Japón e India evitan el dólar. Rusia e Irán comercian directamente. Irán vende petróleo a India a cambio de rupias y de materias primas. También hay comercio directo entre China y Brasil. Los ciudadanos suizos exigen la repatriación de su oro. Los países africanos prohíben el dólar. En fin, que en Zambia te llevan a la cárcel si usas dólares americanos. Relajación cuantitativa 3. Han anunciado, la Reserva Federal, que van a empezar con 40.000 millones de creación de dólares por mes, con lo que estamos en 85.000 millones de dólares creados cada mes, más de 1 billón al año. Y recordad que hicieron falta 200 años para pasar de 0 dólares a 825.000 millones. Y ahora crearán 1 billón cada año. Irán intercambia energía por oro. Singapur elimina el impuesto al dinero. Alemania repatria 150 toneladas de oro desde la Reserva Federal de Nueva York. Los ciudadanos holandeses exigen la repatriación de su oro. Ecuador repatriará parte de sus reservas de oro. Los ciudadanos austríacos exigen la repatriación de su oro. China reconoce una falta de oro en el mercado. Y ahora, la Fed va a aumentar el ritmo de impresión de 40.000 a 85.000 millones de dólares todos los meses, justo por encima del billón anual. Esos son los clavos en el ataúd del patrón dólar y se están acelerando. Está pasando ahora mismo. No queda mucho tiempo y si esperas mucho, al final la oportunidad se esfuma.
Va a fracasar. ¿Por qué es el dólar sacrosanto? ¿Por qué no le va a pasar al dólar? Ocurrirá. La gente que dice que no, que tenemos tecnología, desarrolla Internet, pero si son argumentos ridículos. La verdad es que toda divisa fiduciaria ha fracasado. No hay razón para que ésta no la haga. Lo que me preocupa tanto es que es una situación global, así que va a provocar problemas globales. Y es la confianza rompiéndose y ya se está viendo porque ya hay países que comercian en sus propias divisas, evitan el dólar, comercian petróleo y cada vez va a ir a más. La gente simplemente abandonará el dólar y llegará a un punto, antes de colapsar completamente, donde el dólar solo se va a estar usando en los Estados Unidos, no se usará tanto fuera, porque habrá muchos acuerdos entre naciones que estarán evitando usar el dólar.
This isn't going to be pretty when it happens. I am not an end of worlder or a doomsday guy.
No va a ser bonito. No soy un agorero ni un profeta del fin del mundo. Pero lo que se puede hacer es jugar la mano que se te ha repartido. Si hay un nuevo sistema monetario, que creo que es inevitable, hay mucha energía metida en este sistema y esa energía tendrá que explotar por algún lado. Cuando ocurra, habrá una gran transferencia de riqueza de un lado de la balanza a otro. La gente no se da cuenta de que, aunque creas que no estás metido en el asunto, estás apostando por un desenlace. Esta transferencia de riqueza te afectará, quieras o no. Si tienes activos, papel y divisas, la apuesta es en un sentido. Si tienes oro u otros activos físicos, estás apostando en sentido contrario. Este es el cambio de las reservas chinas. Están acumulando oro y reduciendo la exposición a bonos del Tesoro americanos. Esto es el oro que se guarda en China. La línea verde es acumulativa en este eje de aquí, que han subido de 700 a 6.000 toneladas desde el 2000. Y estas son las reservas del Banco Central, esta es la producción de las minas, y esto, vosotros sois los primeros en verlo, es el oro comerciado a través de Shanghái hacia China. En los últimos 2 años han aumentado sus compras. Ellos saben que el patrón dólar se termina y se están protegiendo. Y es posible que lleguemos a ver el renminbi respaldado por el oro, el yuan. Esta es interesante. Cambiando la influencia global. Esta es la correlación que existe entre la divisa y una cesta de divisas. Es decir, esta cesta de divisas, si las sumas, suben o bajan, y esto es antes de la crisis, ¿no? Con datos del Fondo Monetario Internacional. Es la correlación entre el 2005 y el 2008, entre esta cesta y el dólar o el yuan. Así que si las divisas subían, el dólar haría prácticamente lo mismo. El renminbi, el yuan, lo mismo. Y esto es hoy. El dólar está acabado.
La pregunta no es si vamos a tener un nuevo sistema monetario internacional, la pregunta es ¿qué será? Hay 4 opciones, la primera es la de múltiples divisas reserva. Barry Eichengreen es de Berkeley su mayor defensor con algún ensayo, pero no estoy tan convencido porque el problema es que no está anclado a nada. Ya tuvimos un sistema de múltiples divisas en los 20, en eso tiene razón, pero eran reservas el dólar y la libra, ambas estaban sujetas al oro. Es tras Bretton Woods en 1944 cuando solo hay una, ¿no? El dólar anclada al oro hasta el 71, momento en el que se desliga, pero todas las demás están ligadas al dólar. Así que nunca hemos tenido un sistema sin anclaje y no estoy tan seguro de que eso sea estable. El SDR es la segunda opción, es una divisa cesta promovida por el Fondo Monetario Internacional que de momento sigue siendo dinero impreso. El FMI lo imprime, lo manda a los países, sube las reservas, justo como la Fed, imprime y eleva las reservas bancarias sin respaldo. El tercer camino es alguna variación sobre un patrón oro y la cuarta es el caos. Un momento en el que nadie hace nada, mucha buena voluntad, negación, hay desorden, hay retraso. La gente al final pierde fe en el dinero papel, hay un retorno a los activos tangibles y hay un colapso secuencial de las divisas fiduciarias a nivel mundial. En este momento hay que tomar medidas urgentes y eso puede incluir coacción, confiscación, congelación de activos papel, podría ser una variedad de cosas. Así que entre todas las opciones, la que prefiero es el oro, pero creo que será el caos. He hablado de que cada 30 o 40 años el mundo tiene un sistema monetario nuevo. Y durante esos años, los gobiernos y los bancos centrales nos han estado jodiendo más y más y más. Estos nuevos sistemas de divisas son creados por los mismos idiotas que idearon el último fracaso. Son los bancos grandes, los bancos centrales y son los gobiernos los que están creando estos sistemas nuevos que siempre acaban engañando a la gente y robando la riqueza de los ciudadanos y enriquece a los gobiernos y a los bancos. Cada nuevo sistema aumenta la velocidad a la que se transfiere la riqueza. Este se caerá como los anteriores, con una diferencia. Internet. La gente está conectada a nivel global y la gente está formándose y la información fluye. Así que espero que volvamos al oro, no al patrón oro, que es una mierda. Hice un vídeo sobre esto. Con el patrón oro se supone que se guarda una cantidad de oro por una cantidad de divisa. Comienza con una relación 1-1 y luego se imprimen más divisas que oro existe. Así que volvemos al patrón oro y nos vuelven a engañar. Si usamos oro y plata, si la gente se educara sobre esto antes de que todo cambie, entonces los gobiernos no nos pueden estafar. Limitas su capacidad de transferir la riqueza de los ciudadanos a los gobiernos y los bancos. Mucha gente dice que no se pueden usar el oro y la plata porque son pesados y voluminosos, pero no es verdad. Puedes meter tu oro en una cámara, en una caja fuerte y pagar transfiriendo la propiedad de cierta cantidad de oro, onzas, gramos, miligramos o nanogramos, a la cuenta de otra persona mediante una tarjeta de crédito, un cheque o un teléfono. Si volvemos a tener una divisa respaldada, creo que el menor engaño que podríamos tener, es decir, la menor cantidad de dólares convertibles posibles, serían los dólares almacenados en diferentes bancos centrales. Eso sería similar a Bretton Woods. Analicé esto en 2005 para redactar el libro.
Y ya entonces hacía falta que el oro cotizara $20.000 la onza para respaldar toda la divisa almacenada en bancos centrales extranjeros. Y si quisieran respaldar todos los dólares, entonces hablamos de cientos de miles de dólares por onza. Simplemente no hay tanto oro y hay mucha divisa que seguimos imprimiendo cada minuto de cada día. Esto es el oro y cómo recupera el valor respecto al aumento de la base monetaria. Esta es la base monetaria de Estados Unidos, que era lo mismo que el oro en circulación. Entonces fue cuando creamos la Fed en 1913, inflando la divisa para la Primera Guerra Mundial, y tuvimos más dólares impresos que oro respaldándolo. Hubo pánicos bancarios en los 30 y Roosevelt desliga entonces el oro del dólar. Y el valor del oro subió de 20 a $35 la onza. Y cuando eso ocurrió, el oro volvió a recuperar la base monetaria imprimida mientras. Esta es la misma gráfica, esta vez hasta 1971. Donde se ve las entradas de oro de las guerras mundiales. Un 117% de aumento durante la Segunda Guerra Mundial, y eso es lo que hizo de Estados Unidos una superpotencia. Es todo financiero, no es la máquina militar, es la entrada de oro que tuvimos porque todos estaban en guerra menos nosotros, y nos tenían que pagar para conseguir bienes y servicios de consumo. Al entrar en la guerra, volvimos a inflar la moneda hasta 1959, momento en el que los países se empiezan a dar cuenta de que hemos imprimido más dólares de lo que se podía respaldar. Y bajo el sistema Bretton Woods, podían ir a la Fed de Nueva York, solo los bancos extranjeros, no los ciudadanos. Podían entregar sus dólares y recuperar su oro. Estados Unidos pierde la mitad de su oro entre el 59 y el 71, pero siguieron imprimiendo dólares. Si esto hubiera llegado a cero, si hubiera habido $1 más pidiendo su convertibilidad a oro y no hubiera habido oro para respaldarlo, todo el sistema monetario mundial se hubiera derrumbado. Así que Nixon no tuvo otra que sacarnos de Bretton Woods. Los últimos vestigios del patrón oro eran esto, el 15 de agosto del 71. Otra vez la gráfica, la primera, esta la segunda, ahora hasta 1985, y he añadido una segunda línea. ¿Cuántos de vosotros estáis de acuerdo con la afirmación de que el plástico está sustituyendo al dinero en efectivo? Sí, usamos cada vez más la tarjeta y cada vez menos el efectivo, ¿verdad? Bueno, pues estos son los saldos de las tarjetas sin cancelar. Cuando se usa la tarjeta de crédito, en realidad estás creando divisa. El banco no te lo ha prestado. Se han inventado números y añaden el interés para cobrarte en caso de que no pagues a tiempo. Pero el comerciante que te está cobrando no ve la diferencia entre un dólar real y el creado por ti. Para él todo es lo mismo. Esa divisa que has creado se queda en circulación hasta que alguien cancela el saldo de la tarjeta. Así que los créditos de tarjeta sin pagar es efectivo en circulación. En 1971, Nixon nos saca del patrón oro y el oro se convierte en un activo, una materia prima, divisa, dinero de cotización con libre fluctuación, y recuperó el valor de la divisa en circulación de nuevo. Durante un tiempo pudimos volver al patrón oro. Durante un tiempo el valor del oro en la tesorería excedía del dinero imprimido desde Washington a Jimmy Carter, y durante 2 semanas, además, absorbía los créditos vivos. La misma gráfica, antes hasta 1985 y ahora hasta hoy. Ahí está el pico de 1980, cuando sobrepasó la base monetaria y los créditos vivos, y la crisis ahora de la crisis del 2008 y Bernanke. Por cierto, ahora medimos en billones, ¿eh? Empezamos con millones, pasamos a miles de millones y estamos en billones. El rescate de los bancos y la relajación cuantitativa. Y este es el aspecto de la cantidad de divisa disponible hoy, y anuncian la relajación cuantitativa 3, creando 85 billones de dólares al mes y con una proyección hasta 2015. Esta es la proyección para que el oro asuma la base monetaria de hoy. Eso sería entre 13.400 dólares la onza, para que la historia se repita, para que ocurra lo mismo que en 1934 y 1980. Creedme, en los 70 la gente se sobresaltó cuando el oro estaba a 35 dólares la onza y Nixon nos sacó del sistema Bretton Woods. Todas las predicciones indicaban bajadas del oro porque ya no habría demanda monetaria. Cualquiera que dijera que el oro llegaría a los 100 dólares era considerado un lunático. Llegó a los 850 dólares, 24 veces más que el precio de inicio. Cuando escribí mi libro estábamos aquí en cuanto a base monetaria. Para que se repitiera la historia hacía falta un precio de 6.000 dólares la onza. Hoy hacen falta 13.400 dólares. Y si proyectamos la subida de 1980, cuando recuperó el valor de base y crédito vivo, 24.000 dólares la onza. Ese sería el precio. Pero la Fed, esta vez la Fed ha anunciado que va a seguir imprimiendo hasta que se recuperen el empleo y la economía. Hasta 2015, creo. Así que el precio objetivo, según la repetición de la historia y la impresión de la Fed, y si la gente se asusta de la política de la Reserva Federal y, bueno, pues vuelven al oro y la plata para proteger su poder adquisitivo, el oro entonces tendría que llegar hasta los 26.000 dólares la onza. Y si incluimos la revalorización de 1980, nos plantamos en 47.000 dólares la onza. Ni siquiera me gusta medir el oro en dólares. Si se mide en un precio, eso no significa nada, es el valor. ¿Cuánto puedes adquirir con el material? Si tenemos deflación y esa cantidad de divisa se evapora, porque no son más que números en un ordenador, si hay deflación, a lo mejor el precio máximo es de 3.000 dólares la onza y la base monetaria cae hasta algún punto por aquí. Y el Dow se queda en 1.500, y eso significa que el oro todavía valdría el doble y que puedes comprar 14 veces más activos papel que hoy. Y es posible que queden un par de años para esto si te guías por la velocidad de los clavos en el ataúd que hemos visto antes. Si hay inflación, y el Dow llega a los 30.000, quizás el oro llegará a los 60.000. Si hay hiperinflación, quizás el Dow llega a los 30 billones y el oro a los 60 billones. No importa. En cualquier caso, el oro te conseguirá 14 veces más activos papel de lo que consigue hoy. Estos son los activos globales mundiales. Esto es el mercado de bonos, el mercado bursátil, el valor del patrimonio inmobiliario y los depósitos bancarios. Y aquí está el oro. Esa pequeña porción del pastel va a aumentar mucho en los próximos años. Y no porque aparezca más oro, sino porque el precio de los activos va a caer. Los otros activos van a perder el valor. Y el valor del oro va a subir, el precio cambiará y la porción crecerá. Era mayor en 1980 con el oro a 850 dólares y crecerá mucho de nuevo. Pero va a requerir precios más altos. La muerte del patrón dólar. ¿Cuántos de vosotros creéis que estoy previendo lo que va a ocurrir? Podéis ver la llegada de un nuevo sistema monetario. Pasa cada 30 o 40 años. Pero esta vez, en vez de dar un paso atrás en el patrón oro, tenemos que pasar de nada a algo. Va a ser una convulsión mundial, de escala desconocida.
At the end of the day, the fundamental driver of gold
Al final, el motor fundamental del oro no es que esté en tendencia alcista, sino la tendencia bajista del dólar. Preguntémonos a qué precio puede llegar el oro. Bueno, pues, ¿cuánto puede caer el dólar? La respuesta es que el dólar puede valer cero y cualquier cosa dividida por cero es infinito y por tanto el oro puede llegar a infinito. Bien, bueno, pues en el mundo real pasará otra cosa. No es que el oro necesite una cantidad infinita de dólares, sino que más bien el dólar desaparece, no se usa para medir precios, usarás el dólar hasta los 5.000, hasta los 10.000, pero llegará un momento en el que el dólar dejará de importar, que la gente no querrá dólares.
Hay tantas oportunidades en una crisis, es extraordinario. Eso no es una opinión, es historia. Si lees historia, no la semana pasada, la historia de verdad, cuando hay crisis se logran grandes avances. Es cuando los humanos crean y desarrollan nuevas tecnologías, nuevas medicinas. En crisis hay oportunidad. Si eres capaz de estar calmado, educarte y ser resolutivo. La mayor parte de la gente en una crisis pues se asusta, se paraliza, se culpa. Y ninguna de estas emociones es resolutiva ni te va a ayudar a resolver los problemas. Creo que es la mayor oportunidad de la vida de cualquiera. Jamás se ha dado una situación en la que todos los factores se hayan unido de esta manera. Es la primera vez en la historia en la que todas las divisas son fiduciarias y no están respaldadas por nada. Si pasa lo que creo que va a pasar, va a ser la mayor transferencia de riqueza de la historia, por tanto la mayor oportunidad, y no va a volver a ocurrir. Hemos aprendido lo siguiente sobre los secretos del dinero. Hay una pérdida de confianza global en el dólar, que se está acelerando. El cambio a un nuevo sistema monetario es inevitable y probablemente será caótico. Los patrones oro no funcionan durante largos periodos de tiempo, pero el oro mismo sí. La gente contribuye a la expansión de base monetaria mediante la firma de préstamos y el uso de tarjetas de crédito. Y el oro ya se ha recuperado del valor de la base monetaria impresa 2 veces en el siglo pasado. Y muy probablemente vuelva a hacerlo. Esto es todo por ahora. Gracias por vernos y espero que les haya gustado. Sé que he lanzado algunos precios astronómicos para el oro, en el capítulo, pero no es el precio en dólares lo que importa, sino su valor, lo que puede comprar. El precio en cualquier divisa fiduciaria no son más que números y no significan nada. Son solo un montón de números creados por los bancos centrales y por los bancos comerciales y estamos forzados a comerciar en esas divisas. Pero en el siguiente episodio vamos a disipar la cortina de humo sobre el sistema monetario y las divisas nacionales y enseñaros cómo funciona realmente el sistema y cómo todas las divisas nacionales deben seguir perdiendo valor. No es posible que mantengan poder adquisitivo durante un periodo relevante de tiempo. En cuanto a los clavos dorados en el ataúd del dólar, ha pasado poco tiempo desde la conferencia de Singapur y ya hay más clavos. Para una actualización, visiten hiddensecretsofmoney.com y encontrarán en el kit de formación una presentación exclusiva sobre los clavos dorados del ataúd del dólar. Este episodio ya sé que ha sido un poco serio y a lo mejor estáis algo contrariados ahora, pero no todo debe ser pesimismo, ¿eh? Como dije antes, hay momentos en la historia en los que el activo seguro por antonomasia durante los últimos 5.000 años también es el activo con mayor potencial de revalorización en poder adquisitivo. Y he apostado mi vida en ello. Me convertí en inversor en 2002 y empecé a contárselo a la gente. Empecé a advertir sobre lo que iba a pasar con la economía mundial y cómo protegerse. Y convertí en mi misión educar a todos cuanto pudiera. En 2005 publiqué el libro y le di a la gente los medios abriendo goldsilver.com. Creo que hemos creado la mejor distribuidora de oro y plata porque no vendemos oro y plata, somos inversores en oro y plata. Lo que queremos es ayudaros a entender cómo atravesar el desierto que viene, por lo menos darle la vuelta a la tortilla para que vaya en tu beneficio. Si decides que los metales preciosos son tuyo, por favor visita goldsilver.com. Nos encantaría convertirnos en vuestro distribuidor, porque somos más que eso, somos un socio en el mismo barco. Así que gracias. Buena suerte. Y nos vemos en los vídeos exclusivos de hiddensecretsofmoney.com.
Thanks. Do you think this is a man in the lifeboat situation?
Let me ask you this. If you knew the Titanic was going to sink and you were on the Titanic, you know there's going to be a lifeboat situation coming up soon. Would you like lifeboats available? That's right. Would you like to get in the lifeboat early, get a nice seat, maybe close to the water, maybe close to the food supply, right there in the middle, nice and comfy? Or you want to be one of the last ones on the boat and you're jockeying for position, you have to throw a kid out to make room for you? Yeah, so lifeboat situation depends how you like your accommodations on the lifeboat is whether you should be working your way towards it right now. And I would be edging my way towards it right now.
Mike Maloney's Hidden Secrets of Money is made possible by the clients of goldsilver.com. Your continued loyalty and support allows us to educate the public on how to both protect themselves and benefit in the turbulent times ahead. To all goldsilver.com customers, thank you. Hidden Secrets of Money would not be possible without you.
You are about to learn one of the biggest secrets in the history of the world. It's a secret that has huge effects for everyone who lives on this planet. Most people can feel deep down that something isn't quite right with the world economy, but few know what it is. Gone are the days where a family can survive on just one paycheck. Every day it seems things are more and more out of control, yet only 1 in a million understand why. You are about to discover the system that is ultimately responsible for most of the inequality in our world today. The powers that be do not want you to know about this, as this system is what has kept them at the top of the financial food chain for the last 100 years. Learning this will change your life because it'll change the choices that you make. If enough people learn it, it'll change the world because it'll change the system. For this is the biggest hidden secret of money. Never in human history have so many been plundered by so few, and it's all accomplished through this, the biggest scam in the history of mankind.
They say that money doesn't grow on trees, but the truth is that the modern banking system creates currency far faster than trees can grow. Most people don't have a clue how currency is created. Economists and bankers make it sound so complex that people think they can't understand it. But I'm going to strip our monetary system down to its essence so that you can see the scam behind the curtain and just how it affects you. Every modern society creates currency in pretty much the same way. But since the US dollar is the majority of the world's currency, I'm going to use the United States as our example. It all starts when some politician says, "Vote for me and I'll make sure the government provides you more free stuff than my opponent will." But there's no such thing as a free lunch. So to provide that supposedly free stuff, the politicians vote for the country to spend more than its income. This is called deficit spending. To pay for that deficit spending, the Treasury borrows currency by issuing a bond. So what's a bond? If you think about it, a bond is really nothing but a glorified IOU. It's a pretty piece of paper with numbers printed on it that says, "Loan me $1 trillion today and I promise over a 10-year period I'm going to pay you back that $1 trillion plus interest." But what you need to understand is that Treasury bonds are our national debt. These glorified IOUs are to be paid back by you and I and our descendants through future taxation. Therefore, when the government issues a bond, it steals prosperity out of the future so that it can spend it today. The Treasury then holds a bond auction, and the world's largest banks show up and compete to buy part of our national debt and make a profit on it by earning interest. You'll notice that as we move through this process, the big banks are there, taking a cut every step of the way. This isn't by chance, as you'll see shortly. Then, through a shell game called open market operations, the banks get to sell some of those bonds to the Federal Reserve at a profit. To pay for the bonds, the Federal Reserve opens up its big old checkbook and writes bad, bogus, counterfeit checks that should bounce because they're drawn on an account that always has a zero balance. There isn't one penny in there. To quote from the Boston Federal Reserve, "When you or I write a check, there must be sufficient funds in our account to cover that check. But when the Federal Reserve writes a check, there is no bank deposit on which that check is drawn. When the Federal Reserve writes a check, it is creating money." The Fed then hands those checks to the banks, and at this point, currency springs into existence. The banks then take that currency and buy more bonds at the next Treasury auction. But what is a check? A check is also an IOU. When you write a check, you're making a note that says, "Here's my IOU for cash. All you have to do is go to the bank and pick it up." Now, it's very, very important that you understand this process because we're going to come back later and show you the devastating effect this has on you. The Treasury issues IOUs, bonds. The banks then buy those IOUs with currency. The Federal Reserve then writes IOUs, checks, and hands them to the banks in exchange for the Treasury's IOUs, the bonds. And currency is created. So what's really happening is the Federal Reserve and the Treasury are just swapping IOUs, using the banks as middlemen, and abracadabra, presto, currency magically springs into existence. This process repeats and repeats over and over again, enriching the banks and indebting the public by raising the national debt. The end result is that there's a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury. This process is also where all paper currency comes from. The Federal Reserve and the government mistakenly call it base money because they didn't watch episode 1 of this series and they don't know the difference between money and currency. But I will correctly refer to it as base currency because it is not money. It is currency, and as we've learned, there is a big difference. Money has to be a store of value and maintain its purchasing power over long periods of time. We learned in episode 1 that earlier in our history, our paper currency was just a claim check. It was a representation for real money of intrinsic value, the gold and silver that was held on deposit at the Treasury. You could walk into any bank and slap your currency, like say a $20 bill, on the counter and redeem it for real money, a $20 gold piece. But now, this base currency that's piling up back here is really nothing but a receipt or a claim check on an IOU, that bond. So it's really nothing but a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the newly created currency into the various branches of the government, and the politicians say, "Hey, thanks for that." And the government does some deficit spending on public works, social programs, and war. The government employees, contractors, and soldiers then deposit their pay in the banks. Now this may come as a shock to you, but when you deposit your currency with the bank, you're not actually depositing it into an account to be safely held in trust for you. Instead, you're actually loaning the bank your currency, and within certain legal limits, they can do with it pretty much anything they please. This includes gambling in the stock market and loaning it out, at a profit, of course. Now this is where the machine of currency creation really gets cranking, because this is where something called fractional reserve lending comes into play. Fractional reserve lending is exactly what it says. The banks are allowed to reserve only a fraction of your deposit and loan the rest out. Although reserve ratios may vary, I'm going to use a 10% reserve ratio as our example. If you deposit $100 in your account, the bank can legally take $90 of it and loan it out without telling you. The bank must hold $10 of your deposit in reserve just in case you want some of it. These reserves are called vault cash. But why does your bank account still say you have $100 if the bank has stolen $90 of it? Because the bank left IOUs it created, called bank credit, in its place. Now I know this sounds crazy, but here it is in black and white from the Fed. Commercial banks create checkbook money when they grant a loan simply by adding new deposit dollars in accounts on their books in exchange for a borrower's IOU. These are nothing but numbers that the banks type into their computers. And even though these bank credit IOU numbers are very different from base currency numbers, because they only exist in computers, they are still currency. So now there is $190 in existence. Now the reason people take out loans from the banks is to buy something. They're going to buy a house or a car or something like that. So the borrower takes the $90 that the bank loaned to him from your account and he pays the seller of the item. But then the seller deposits that currency into his account and his bank loans out 90% of that and leaves bank credit numbers in its place. So now there's $271 in existence. This process repeats and repeats until under a 10% reserve ratio, an initial deposit of just $100 can create up to $1,000 of bank credit, all backed by $100 of vault cash, just 10%. But as I said, reserve ratios vary wildly. On some deposits, it's 10%, on others, it's 3%, and on some forms of deposits, reserve requirements are 0. The result is that the expansion of the currency supply by the banks is far greater than even this example would lead you to believe. So once again, when currency is deposited in the banks get to lend it out, and then it gets redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent, redeposited and relent over and over again, creating bank credit all the way. This is where the vast majority of our currency supply comes from. In fact, 92 to 96% of all currency in existence is created not by the government, but here in the banking system. Now, massive amounts of currency spewing into society may at first sound like a fun idea. That is, until you remember one of the most important hidden secrets of money from episode 1, that the prices of everyday goods and services act as a sponge on an expanding currency supply. The more currency we have, the more prices rise. This is where inflation comes from. The true definition of inflation is an expansion of the currency supply. Rising prices are merely the symptom. So our entire currency supply is nothing but a couple of bucks whipped up in this hocus-pocus scam where the Treasury and the Federal Reserve swap glorified IOUs, and a bunch of numbers that the banks just type into their computers. That's it. That's our entire currency supply. It's nothing but a supply of numbers. Some of them printed, most of them typed. And there is nothing else. But if you thought that was crazy, get ready to enter the twilight zone of modern economics. We work for some of that currency supply. True wealth is your time. But we trade away moments of our lives, hour by hour, day by day, and year by year, for numbers that somebody printed on pieces of paper or just typed into a computer. Now those numbers represent our blood, sweat, tears, labor, ideas, and talent. We are what gives the currency its value. But here comes the really cruel joke. We work hard so that we can save some of that currency, so that we can pay the tax collector. In the United States, it's known as the IRS. They then turn it over to the Treasury so that the Treasury can pay the principal plus interest on that bond that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. Now let's do a recap on this section, because this is where the system begins to rob you and I on a massive scale. Much of our taxes are not used for schools, roads, and public services, but to pay interest on bonds that the Federal Reserve bought with a check drawn on an account that has nothing in it. The Federal Reserve is committing fraud. But here's one of the biggest secrets of them all. Before the establishment of the Federal Reserve, there was no need for personal income tax. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913, and that very same year, the Constitution was amended to allow income tax. Do you really think this was just a coincidence? Ask yourself how much income tax you've paid over your lifetime. Much of it has been silently siphoned away into the hands of those who own the system. Yes, this system has owners. Who they are is an even bigger secret that we'll get to shortly. But first, we need to understand the mumbo-jumbo of the so-called debt ceiling. It's all based on a huge paradox. There was interest due on that bond, and there was interest due on every one of those loans that the banks made. That means that there is interest due on every dollar in existence. Let me ask you something. If you borrow the very first dollar into existence, and that's the only dollar that exists on the planet, but you promise to pay it back plus another dollar's worth of interest, where do you get the second dollar to pay the interest? The answer is that you have to borrow that one into existence and promise to pay it back with interest as well. So now there are $2 in existence, but you owe 4, and so on and so on. The result is there's never enough currency to pay the debt. There is always more debt in the system than there is currency in existence to pay the debt. Therefore, the whole system is impossible. It is finite. It will come to an end one day. What would happen if the government stopped borrowing to do deficit spending? Are the payments on those treasury bonds going to stop? What would happen if the public stopped borrowing and going deeper into debt? Are your house and car payments going to stop? No. There is a payment due every month on the principal plus the interest on every dollar in existence, and those payments do not stop. If we stop borrowing, then no new currency is created to replace the currency that we used to make those payments. Whether you're making a payment on a loan or paying tax to make a payment on a bond, the portion of the payment that goes to pay off the principal extinguishes that portion of the debt. But the debt also extinguishes the currency. Currency and debt are like matter and antimatter. When they meet, they annihilate each other. If we just pay off the principal only on all the loans and bonds that exist, the entire currency supply just vanishes. So if we don't go deeper into debt every year, look what happens. The whole thing goes into a deflationary collapse under the weight of those payments. Politicians and pundits alike talk about balancing the budget, paying down the debt, and living within our means. They don't understand that that is deflationary. It is impossible to do under our current monetary system without collapsing the whole economy. This is why any talk of a debt ceiling is not only ridiculous, it's delusional. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt just to continue. And that's why politicians will always kick the can down the road and raise this so-called debt ceiling over and over again until the whole system finally collapses under its own weight. In other words, they don't want it to collapse on their watch. The founding fathers of the United States knew the dangers of central banking and fought to free themselves from this very thing. The Revolutionary War started out as a tax revolt, but now we must pay tax just to have a monetary system. Having just suffered through the hyperinflation of the continental dollar, which was printed into oblivion to finance the Revolutionary War, they understood the dangers of fiat currency and debt-based monetary systems. So to protect future generations from institutional theft and out-of-control government, they wrote into the Constitution that only gold and silver can be money for the simple fact that you can't print them. Our current system is not only unconstitutional, but it robs us of the liberty and prosperity our forefathers fought and died for. We are all feeling the effects of ignoring the Constitution right now. By forcing more currency into circulation, our purchasing power is diluted. Inflation is a slow and insidious stealth tax that is simply the result of this debt-based monetary system. This system empowers and benefits those who create the currency and receive it first, as they get to spend it into circulation before it has an effect on the economy. They're stealing purchasing power from you and transferring it to the banks and the government every hour of every day because of this false monetary system. And it's not like the people at the top don't know this. To quote the Federal Reserve, the decrease in purchasing power incurred by the holders of money due to inflation imparts gains to the issuers of money. This is a fraud. It is a pyramid scheme, it is a Ponzi scheme, it's a scam, and it's a lie. Our entire monetary system is nothing but a form of legalized theft. But here's the biggest con job of them all. The Federal Reserve is not federal. It has stockholders. There is no federal agency that has stockholders. What's a stockholder? A share of stock represents a percentage of ownership in a corporation. So the stockholders are the owners of that corporation. Therefore, the Federal Reserve is a private corporation with owners. And you can see it for yourself if you go to the Federal Reserve's website, and it will say, the stockholders receive an annual dividend of 6%. Now we know that the stock in the Federal Reserve was originally issued to the largest banks in the United States. But because of mergers and acquisitions through the years, you can't actually trace who owns the stock in the Federal Reserve. That's a very closely guarded secret. My guess would be that the owners are those primary dealers, the banks that get to make a profit by selling part of our national debt, those bonds, to the Federal Reserve, who buys them with a check from nothing. Then we pay tax to pay the principal and the interest on those bonds so that the Federal Reserve can pay the banks a 6% dividend. Don't be alarmed if you don't quite comprehend the deception of this system at first glance. Very few people do. It is purposely complex. The economist John Maynard Keynes once wrote, "By this means, government may secretly and unobserved confiscate the wealth of the people, and not one man in a million will detect the theft." I believe that presented correctly, anyone can understand this system, regardless of how complex it is. So let's do a recap and break it down even more. The way the system works is that, step 1, the government creates glorified IOUs. These bonds increase our national debt and put the public on the hook to pay it back. Step 2, IOUs are swapped to create currency. The Treasury sells the bonds to the banks. The banks then turn around and sell our national debt at a profit to the Federal Reserve, which they probably own. The Federal Reserve then opens its checkbook that doesn't have a penny in it and buys those IOUs with IOUs that it writes, checks, on a checking account that has a zero balance. Then they give those checks to the banks and currency just springs into existence, and then the whole process repeats. This results in a buildup of bonds at the Federal Reserve and currency at the Treasury, which is really just a supply of numbers. The Treasury then deposits the numbers in the various branches of the government, and we get to step 3. The government spends the numbers on promises, public works, social programs, and war. Then the government employees, contractors, and soldiers deposit their pay into the banks, and we get to step 4, where the banks multiply the numbers by magically inventing more IOUs through fractional reserve lending, where they steal a portion of everyone's deposit and lend it out. That currency gets redeposited, and then a portion is stolen again, and the process repeats over and over, magnifying the currency supply exponentially. Then we work for some of those numbers, which brings us to step 5, where our numbers are taxed. We pay tax to the IRS, who then turns our numbers over to the Treasury, so the Treasury can pay the principal plus the interest on bonds that were purchased by the Federal Reserve with a check from nothing. Then we get to step 6, the debt ceiling delusion. The system is designed to require ever-increasing levels of debt and will eventually collapse under its own weight because politicians always kick the can down the road. They don't want it to collapse on their watch. And finally, step 7, the secret owners take their cut. The world's largest banks own the Federal Reserve. Those banks make a profit selling our national debt to the Fed. They make a profit when the Fed pays them interest on the reserves held at the Fed, and the Fed pays them a 6% dividend on their ownership of the Fed. This system is fundamentally evil. It funnels wealth from the working population to the government and the banking sector. It is the cause of the artificial booms and busts of modern economies, and it causes great disparity of wealth between the rich and the working class. And it is only possible because we no longer use real money, we use currency. But worst of all, it is a form of enslavement. Bond is the root word of bondage. Whenever a government issues a bond, it is a promise to make us pay tax in the future. Nobody asked you if you wanted to pay tax today for the prosperity we all enjoyed in the last century. Nobody is asking our children if they want to work hard in the future to pay for the prosperity we're enjoying now. George Washington once wrote to James Madison, "No generation has the right to contract debts greater than can be paid off during the course of its own existence." By stealing prosperity from tomorrow so we can spend it today, we enslave ourselves and future generations. Now this all sounds pretty bad, but there is great hope, for you are the greatest threat to this false monetary system. This system relies on the public being ignorant of its workings. Please share this knowledge with everyone you know, because an informed public that fully understands the system can build a better future for generations to come. And now I leave you with this quote, widely attributed to a former director of the Bank of England. The modern banking system manufactures money out of nothing. The process is perhaps the most astounding piece of sleight of hand that was ever invented. Banking was conceived in inequity and born in sin. Bankers own the earth. Take it away from them, but leave them the power to create money and control credit, and with the flick of a pen, they will create enough money to buy it back again. But if you want to continue as the slaves of bankers and pay the cost of your own slavery, let them continue to create money and to control credit. This is the Federal Reserve in Washington, D.C. It's located on Constitution Street, and that is just as much of a joke as the New York Fed being located on Liberty Street. Both of them are unconstitutional, both of them limit our liberty, and they transfer wealth away from us every second of every day to the Federal Reserve, to the government, and to the banking sector. You are now among the 1 in a million who can detect the theft of your prosperity. So the big question is, what can you do about it? 1. Watch this video until you can describe and teach it to others. Those who understand this system can make preparations for its unavoidable collapse and protect themselves. History shows that those who don't will probably be wiped out. 2. Share this video with everyone, especially those you care about. All it takes is a mouse click or two to get this message in front of millions. Post this video on Facebook, tweet it, email it to loved ones. Please share it wherever you can. 3. Join the conversation. The current world monetary system is based on a 300-year-old design meant to enrich a few at the expense of the many. There must be a better way. At hiddensecretsofmoney.com, we've created an open-source platform for the design and development of a new world monetary system. We're calling on every economist, every student, every college, every bright mind, and anyone who cares to join the discussion. In educating ourselves and each other, we can prevent the further loss of our freedoms and maybe, just maybe, win some of them back.
Your episode 4 is very beneficial, very helpful. It's going to introduce these ideas to a lot of people, and like I've just been talking about, we have to change people's mind, and the more they understand it, the better. And I think we're at this point now where more people in the last several years, 4 or 5 years, have thought about the Fed than they ever have in the previous 95 years. So I think an explanation and diagrams to show it is very helpful, because quite frankly, they're not going to get it in their grade school. They're not going to get it in their high schools. They're not going to get it in college unless they're in a very rare circumstance to understand how this works.
You know, for years before I got involved in really studying gold and some of the things I write and talk about today, I was a monetary economist for decades. You know, in your video, you talk about the primary dealers. I was chief counsel and chief credit officer of one of the largest primary dealers for 10 years. So I had an inside seat on the Treasury market and have the privilege of working with several former vice chairmen of the Board of Governors, Manley Johnson and David Mullins, going back to the 80s and 90s. So I'm very immersed in what you were talking about. And I thought it was extremely accurate, extremely clear. I didn't think you were stretching on any points. It was really like something out of a PhD course, except that it was very easy to understand. I think it's accessible. I think we're seeing a little bit of a revolution in communications in the following sense. You know, as you point out, the Fed was created in 1913. Well, in 1913, there was no web, there was no YouTube, no Twitter. There was really no one to kind of stand up and oppose the Fed or call them out, if you will, or really get into a discussion that everyday Americans could follow. That's not true now with social media and everything else. You can reach out to millions and tens of millions of people and tell them what's going on. I think you've done that. You've done it successfully. I applaud it. I think this is a great video. I look forward to seeing it again. I know millions of people will enjoy it.
Well, as we know, the Federal Reserve believes it can create money out of thin air, not realize money is supposed to represent real products and services. And what people don't realize is when the Fed does that, in effect, as Keynes pointed out, it's a form of taxation. It's a form of confiscation. And because people don't see it, the politicos get away with it, but it also undermines social trust. It just is corrosive throughout society. We're going to have a lot of turmoil in the coming years, but it's going to be the kind of turmoil that leads to positive things. So don't despair. Get out there and fight, because the tide is going to turn. This is going to be the status last stand.
Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by the new Gold Silver Vault app. Get it for free at hiddensecretsofmoney.com.
The entire world is facing a debt-driven disaster, the scale of which has never been seen before in human history. The situation is now so severe that we're left with only two options: default on our debt or inflate it away. You can already hear people blaming the free markets and even money itself for our problems, and to me this is just tragic, because we don't have free markets anymore, and we certainly don't use real money. This is the real reason for our problems. Our money itself has been corrupted. It's not just an issue of economics. This affects your freedom. When this crisis hits, people will be screaming for the government to do something when it was the government that caused the problems in the first place. Many societies have faced this dilemma in the past, and we can learn what the outcomes might be simply by studying what they did and comparing it to what we're doing today. So while I was in Germany, I decided to stop by one of my favorite museums and take you on a kind of crash course of the history of real money, how it evolved, and the twin dangers that arise when money is corrupted. I'm here at the Bundesbank Money Museum in Germany, and this is one of the best museums I have ever seen. Right at the very beginning of the museum, you walk in and it starts with barter. You know, originally the first form of currency was livestock. The problem with livestock, though, like for instance this cow, if I traded this cow to you for something and somebody else wants to trade you something else that's of much lower value, you can't make change. A system that relies on barter is very inefficient because you not only suffer from the problems of divisibility, you also rely on the hope that you will find someone who has a good or service that you need, who wants something that you have at the same place and at the same time. In economics, this is called the coincidence of wants. Now add the fact that most goods have a shelf life before they perish, and you can see why barter systems held mankind back for so long. So what was it that solved the coincidence of wants and propelled us out of the Stone Age and into space? It was the invention of money. Money is not evil. It is a magnificent tool that allows us to trade our specialized skills and to store our economic energy. Without it, we'd be struggling to feed ourselves each day, and our average lifespan would still be 30. In episode 1, we learned that real money has to fulfill certain properties in order to function. But 2,600 years after its emergence, people still confuse money with currency, even the so-called experts. So they've got here some of the things about what money is. The first example here is money is whatever goes. So in earlier cultures, commodities such as cattle, stones, or metals were used as money. Buyers took the value of the goods on trust when making their purchase. Today, too, money is a question of confidence. So the currency, today isn't money, today we're using currency, but the only reason it has any purchasing power whatsoever is because yesterday your experience was that it purchased something. So you have faith that it's going to purchase something tomorrow. Otherwise, it has no value. Whatever form it takes, reliable money has two characteristics. It is genuine and it is stable. People can rely on its value. Well, you know, what fiat currency around the planet has maintained its value? They all fall in value. So right away you can see the difference. They're talking about currency here. And when they say it's genuine, I mean, what is genuine? A counterfeiter, somebody that's running their own printing press in their basement, is making genuine notes as far as he's concerned. I mean, they're genuine counterfeits. These things that just come off of a printing press, well, yeah, it's a genuine lie from a central bank or a government that you've got something that's going to store value for you, because
it doesn't over long periods of time. It loses value. Gold, banknotes, and electronic money, meaning electronic currency, may be stored, divided up, or transported. As its material value has declined over time, its genuineness has had to be beyond question. Well, this one says that it's got to maintain its value, and right here they're contradicting the next one. The one thing here, gold, is the only thing that they're talking about that has not lost its value. In the past, rare goods were used as money. Today, central banks must ensure that the supply of money is restricted. Well, what are they doing all over the planet today? They're lifting all the restrictions on how much currency they're creating. They're flooding the planet with currency. The next display shows the usual museum pieces that are described as commodity money: cowrie shells, representative axes, cocoa beans, and the like. While these work better than barter, none of them were actually money because they all had a weakness: one or more properties of money that they couldn't fulfill. Therefore, they are commodity currencies, not money. Some of these were widely used right up until the beginning of the 20th century, and there's some stuff here that I haven't seen before. Here's something very interesting. This brick of tea, its value is in the intrinsic, it's in the commodity that you're using, it's the tea. But this one has a certain fungibility to it. Each unit would have the same value, and you can make change. You can snap these things apart into units of 6. It's portable. It's not that heavy. This fulfills quite a few of the functions of money. I would not imagine that it's that durable. It probably doesn't wear that well. And now we come to the emergence of real money. Here we have little pieces of metal, just little pieces that have been broken off of bars or something that was cast, other little blobs of metal that were traded as a currency. You know, they had purchasing power, they had an intrinsic value, but they still weren't fungible, which means interchangeable. Every one of them had a different value. You can see that some of them have a higher silver content, some of them have a higher gold content. These are called electrum. It's a mixture of gold and silver, naturally occurring. What you notice is that this is from the 7th century BC, and then between the 7th and the 6th century, we're talking about somewhere between 680 and 630 BC, the emergence of true money. Here we've got 4 coins. The large one is a 1/3 stater coin, and the other 3 are 1/6 stater coins. Each unit is interchangeable. It's now a unit of account. You can take so many of these in trade for so many of loaves of bread, and you don't have to break out your little scale and weigh them any longer. With the little chunks of metal, you had to weigh every transaction that was going on. You had to weigh whatever your payment was and then take a guess as to what the purity was. Here you have some standards that were set by mints and guaranteed by those mints. These are a unit of account. They're fungible. Every one of them is interchangeable. They're portable, they're durable in your pocket over long periods of time. They're divisible. You can make change. You can see there's a 1/3 stater and 1/6 staters. And they're a store of value over long periods of time. These still have purchasing power today, 2,600 years after they were made. Another thing that I find really interesting is between maybe 680 BC and 300 BC, cultures all around the world, they all gravitated toward gold and silver coinage as money. The entire world sort of decided all together that gold and silver were money. Why? Because the free markets keep on selecting gold and silver as money because of the properties that it has. So, now we get to the room of real money. This is a vault door, and this is where they've got all the great examples of the real gold and silver coins. So come on in and join me. So here we get to the first, this is gold and silver, what they're using to make money, and here we have some very early representations of gold and silver coins. And I love these displays. They start with coins in Lydia, so these coins go back to the very first minting of true coinage. So here we have the starting of the 6th century BC, and then it goes up to the 3rd century, and then from the 5th to the 11th century, and the 13th to the 15th century. And these displays just go on with the history of real money, gold and silver. Here is 17th and 18th century. Here we come to the 19th century, and now we're all the way up to the 20th century here. And here we come to our first example of government-issued fiat currency. This is from China. This is from 1375. And what's interesting is I have a chart that compares the value of the paper currency in China compared to silver. And there was a hyperinflation of this currency. It wasn't backed by anything. It wasn't backed by taxes. It wasn't backed by anything in the Treasury. They could just print this. And so this went into a hyperinflation because the government was just running its budget by just doing deficit spending by printing. And then I'm going to skip to some of the colonial currency. This is the United States, and each one of these currencies is printed by a different state. We've got Maryland, South Carolina, North Carolina, Connecticut, New York. This one here is particularly interesting. It's printed in the 14th year of the reign of King George III. It's dated March 25th, 1776. So this is just a few months before the Declaration of Independence. It says, "'Tis death to counterfeit." But this was printed just before we started coming out with the continental dollar, which went into a hyperinflation because of pure deficit spending on the Revolutionary War. And so this is the wall where real money gets corrupted. This is where it all turns to paper, which sometimes is backed by something, but it can be a lie. They can print more than they have of the stuff to back it. As we learned in episode 2, one of the first things a country does at the outbreak of war is to suspend redemption rights so that their currency is no longer redeemable in gold. This is exactly what Germany did before World War I. After losing the war, they suffered through one of the worst hyperinflations on record when they were burdened with massive reparation payments to France and the Allies. These heavy penalties stifled the German economy and brought it to a standstill, leaving the country with the same two choices all indebted nations have faced throughout history: default on their debt or inflate it away. Defaulting was not a viable option, as they were completely impoverished, weakened, and surrounded by armed forces ready to take their land. Since their currency was no longer tied to gold, it was decided to light up the printing presses and inflate their way out, paying the debts with new currency created out of thin air. This had drastic consequences. Check out some of this Weimar currency. The display starts with one mark that actually purchased something, but soon the notes rise to the thousands, then the millions, then the billions, and finally the trillions. It's mind-blowing. You'll notice that I'm laughing a little bit as we move through the museum, but I'm not laughing at the people. I'm laughing at the stupidity of central banks and of governments and how we never seem to learn from history. Okay, this is an example of different currencies used during the hyperinflation, and they call some of it inflation money and emergency money. This is interesting. They figured the way out of hyperinflation was to print more. So in 1923, the value of money fell by 50% or more per day. So that means prices are doubling every day if it's falling by 50%. Nearly everyone spent their money as quickly as possible on bread, shares, and other safe assets. Well, I don't consider shares safe assets. Actually, the stock market did not keep up with the inflation. However, this rapid circulation only served to stoke inflation even further. That's the function of velocity of money. It's just when velocity picks up, it's just like expanding the quantity. It's got the same effect. At the end, even 144 printing companies working for the Reichsbank could not keep up with the demand for banknotes. Emergency money issued by cities, local authorities, as well as banks and other enterprises started being circulated. So everybody was issuing currency to add to the currency that the government was printing like crazy. Although banknotes with face values of trillions of marks were issued, the vast demand for money, that's not correct, the vast demand for currency led to a paper shortage.
printers used anything that could be found, including wool, wood, and silk. So here's some example of wood, wool, and silk currencies over here. So this is a great example of how even here, in a museum of what they call money, this is the Bundesbank, one of the world's great central banks, if you can call any central bank great. They don't understand the difference between money and currency. They're calling all of this money, and it has nothing to do with money. This is just a promise. It was a promise to pay money at one point, and then it was a broken promise. People will have faith in these government-created currencies, and it allows governments to basically rob their own people. The government erased the debts that they had left over from World War I by just hyperinflating the currency, and basically that transfers all the wealth of the middle class to the government. The government inflated away the debts, but they also inflated away the prosperity of their entire population. When we were in Germany, we got a chance to shoot in front of the Bundestag, which used to be called the Reichstag, and it's very, very significant in that out of monetary crisis, you very often see the political landscape change dramatically. It's the middle class of a country that defines the country with their vote. They're the largest sector of any country, about 70%. And a currency crisis like a hyperinflation wipes out and impoverishes the middle class. And they become filled with fear. And it's very easy for somebody to come in and prey on that fear. And dictators arise out of hyperinflation. And this is one of my greatest fears as far as the United States goes. I think that we all have to be very, very careful and very watchful for what happens in the future. A few years ago, I was interviewing Congressman Ron Paul, and he said, I think that there's going to be a financial collapse before they come around to thinking seriously about monetary policy. But the real thing we have to worry about is not the loss of our wealth. It's the rise of a dictator. It's the loss of our freedom. And what's interesting is the rise of Hitler. There were 2 times where he played on the public sphere. He could never have come to power had there not been a hyperinflation back in 1923. Just 1 week before the end of that hyperinflation, that's when Hitler made his first big public appearance. Playing to the public fear, Hitler and his stormtroopers took over a beer hall called the Bürgerbraukeller that seats around 3,000 people. And he took the stage by gunpoint, and to this literally captive audience, he gave the speech that would change the world. Because of the hyperinflation, the audience had been recently impoverished. Their wealth had been stolen by the government running the printing presses. And so they're all scared. He offers them a scapegoat and tells them he's got the way out. He became very popular after that, and the very next day, the people that were listening to him followed him in an attempt to overthrow the government. He was arrested, tried, and convicted of high treason and served time. While he was in jail, he was provided with a private secretary, Rudolf Hess, and he actually wrote about half of Mein Kampf while he was serving time. But once the economy started to recover, Hitler lost that leverage, that power. He could no longer play on the fear of the public once the economic situation had changed. By the middle of the Roaring '20s, he had become a joke. The Nazi Party had gone to less than 2% of the vote. Then along came the Great Depression, and Hitler seized this opportunity again. He was the first politician to actually campaign by aircraft, hitting multiple cities in a single day. And the Nazi Party went from 2% of the vote to the second largest party in Germany. So playing on the public sphere, Hitler was able to take away the rights of Germans. He was able to, all these guaranteed rights in the Weimar Constitution, private property rights, the right to assemble, public assembly, the right to privacy in the mail, the telephone system. He just took away all of their rights and seized power. So these are some of the things that we have to be concerned about and be very mindful of. Economic crisis very often leads to the rise of a dictator. Yeah, the fact that this was just 70 to 80 years ago, basically there are still people alive today that experienced this, but enough of them have died off to where the warnings fall on deaf ears. Berlin is a great example of another massive danger to individual freedom that economic crisis can bring, the swing from capitalism to collectivism. After World War II, the city was basically divided in half, the West being capitalist and the East communist. Germany was reunified in 1990, but even this short period of separation showed the vastly different levels of prosperity that the two systems achieved. So this is the famous Checkpoint Charlie, and what's interesting is how quickly an economy can heal. Just 20 years ago, you would have seen a tremendous difference between the East and the West. You'd have one side that has tall buildings and is much more industrialized and new, and then one side that's very old and gray. It was one of the best examples of what a state-run society does to an economy. How the more the public relies on government, the worse the general economy gets. What happens, in capitalism you have the greatest disparity between the poorest and the richest individuals, and there's a backlash against that. And you see this happen in waves and cycles, this cycle that goes from capitalism to collectivism. Here, the example, you had this line going right through a city, and one side of the city that was very poor, and the other side prosperous by comparison. Now, when we go toward collectivism, they want to eliminate this great disparity between the poorest and the richest individuals. But what happens isn't that they raise the standard of living for the poor up here. They drag the whole economy down so that everybody ends up living down here, except for the people that are running the government. Collectivism is a danger because we've proven time and time again that it doesn't work. The evidence is in. If you look at history, it's clear that maximum prosperity can only be achieved through individual freedom, free markets, and sound money. You'd think that we'd learn from history, but I'm going to show you a few more displays from the museum that prove conclusively we haven't. And this is where we are today. This is a sheet of 50-euro notes, and these come out of the printing press, bam, 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 just like those notes did. And the entire world today is sort of, every central bank across the planet is creating currency like crazy right now. I think we're going into a deflation, so they're trying to stave off deflation right now by printing their way out of it. So here we've got some examples of the technology that governments around the world are putting into their counterfeit currency so that the public can't counterfeit the currency that the governments are now counterfeiting. So you've got all these holograms and watermarks and different threads and different types of paper. And then here's this big old printing plate where they pop these things out a mile a minute. And right now they are hyperinflating the base money around the world, the paper money. We're going into a deflation, though, of the credit money, the voodoo hocus-pocus currency that the banks just type into the computer. That's starting to collapse, where this stuff is expanding. So we learned in episode 4 that modern currency creation is a complete scam, but a whole lot of people had trouble believing that it could be true. The European Central Bank has this awesome display that shows you exactly how it's done, and it's basically the same as our episode 4. So here's a quick recap thanks to the ECB. Basically, the central bank and the Treasury swap IOUs. The central bank writes a check and the Treasury issues a Treasury bond, which is an IOU, and that creates currency, and then it gets, somebody is paid, it gets deposited into a bank account, and 1,000 marks, they would hold 10%. So right here, they're already telling you that his bank account is a lie. He deposited 1,000 in it. They only withhold 100 in case he wants some of that. And then they loan out 900, which then she buys something from this guy, he deposits the 900. They borrow 90% of that and leave just 10% on deposit for him. And the result is that it expands. Every 1,000 ends up creating 10,000, or every $1 creates $10. And they've got the result here. It's all sort of a voodoo hocus-pocus scheme. One of the great things that I've noticed here is that throughout the museum they keep on proving the point that even though this is the Bundesbank Museum, they prove the point that fiat currencies that come off of a printing press eventually go to zero, that they're really worthless. This says the ideal goal of all monetary systems was to ensure that money is trustworthy and kept in short supply. Metal-based currencies restrict the money supply because metal deposits are naturally limited. However, during the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century, the rapidly growing economy needed a means of payment which could adapt flexibly to this growth. Baloney. You can have a fixed currency supply, and when you have economic growth, it means that the currency gains in purchasing power. In the 20th century, uncovered currencies, meaning unbacked currencies, have been the norm. In principle, the money stock could grow unchecked. This is why central banks must ensure that the money stock is in line with economic growth. Yeah, right. So here we've got my buddy Milton. Actually, Milton was sort of a semi-free market economist. He won the Nobel Prize, so he's considered the dean of the Chicago School of Monetary Thought, which are monetarists. They believe that we should have a Federal Reserve and it should expand and contract the currency supply to achieve stable prices. One of the problems with Keynesians and monetarists and so on is that they think you should expand it and contract it, but they never contract it. They just, Keynesian, you're supposed to spend when the economy is bad. The government's supposed to spend and stimulate and then withdraw currency from circulation to keep us from going into a bubble caused by the expansion of credit and the spending that they did during the bad portion of the economy. So they take this rubber band and they stretch it, and it's supposed to come back, but they never do that. They just keep on stretching it to infinity. And here we are, right now, where we are in the world is that rubber band is about to snap with every currency on the planet. And so I'm instability, I'm in deflation, inflation. Let me see, I'm going to cause a hyperinflation. Oh, it just went off the inflation scale. I guess I did cause a hyperinflation. Oops. And now the whole thing is collapsing. This game of inflation and deflation has never worked. Right now we're on the precipice of the whole system collapsing, and just like the game, our monetary system will reset. This is where the twin dangers we learned about may rear their ugly heads, so it's up to all of us to learn from history. I mentioned earlier that it was the invention of money that allowed humans to prosper and rise out of the Stone Age. But money is only part of the equation. What use is money if you don't have freedom? So what's going to happen? Will we default or inflate our way out of the mess we're in? Since 2005, I've been stating publicly, and I also wrote in my book, that I believe we're headed toward a series of events involving a short-term deflation followed by a big inflation or hyperinflation. If you really want to learn how this inflation might affect you and your family, join me at hiddensecretsofmoney.com for this episode's exclusive presentation. It's a special video that shows where I believe we are on this economic roller coaster of a ride and how I think it'll play out. So for now, what can you do? 1. Share this video on social media and subscribe to our YouTube channel. 2. Educate yourself by watching the rest of this series. And 3. Take action to protect yourself and your family. Learn what you can do at hiddensecretsofmoney.com. I'll see you there. Should I buy $500,000 or $1 million? Let me see how much. This is not going to travel well in the suitcase, but it would be good to have €1 million, wouldn't it? Tough decision. So, okay, I'm going to buy €250,000. So here's €50 for your €250,000. And yeah. And I get change back. This is about €8 to buy €250,000.
7,95, 8, 9, 10.
Okay.
40 sind 50.
Okay. And what's interesting is these are going to eventually be in here. And it won't be too long before these end up like this. Oh, and we get some chocolate gold coins. Dankeschön. So that's our tour of one of the best monetary museums I've seen so far. But what amazes me is that they still just don't get it.
This episode was brought to you by the new Gold Silver Vault app. Get the latest silver and gold prices, news, videos, and track your holdings using the virtual vault feature all in the palm of your hand. Get it for free at hiddensecretsofmoney.com.